connection can be unreliable sometimes. It might be difficult to get staff to work on Wednesday evenings. These look like constraints, but they are uncertain. They're actually risk causes, and so they should be dealt with through risk management. Now let's have a look at assumptions. Assumption, a factor in the planning process that is considered to be true, real or certain without proof or demonstration. That's from PMBOK Guide, page 699. You do not have to prove assumptions, but you do need to believe them to be true. And of course, if somebody approaches you and asks, where did you get that assumption from, you have to be able to justify how you came up with it. Examples of assumptions might be, it will not rain during this project in the Sahara Desert. The customer will provide a subject matter expert to work with the team. All of the materials can be purchased locally. Members of the team in China can understand English. You have reasons to believe these to be true because as a result of phone calls, ad hoc meetings, your own experience and so on. You believe they are true, but you don't need to prove them. But please note that if one of your assumptions proves to be totally wrong, you will need to explain why you believed it. And for this reason, it's important to maintain backup documentation for such things. The following are not examples of assumptions. We might get at least 3 volunteers to work overtime. We might not make any mistakes. The first is not an assumption because the word might. This means it may or may not happen. If there's any uncertainty, then it can't be certain, can it? I.e., you can't actually believe something if there's a chance it may not happen. The second one is not a valid assumption because people make mistakes on projects. Benjamin Franklin said there are only 2 certainties in life, death and taxes. But I say there are 3 certainties in life, death, taxes and mistakes. But I would like to address a very common mistake at this point. Firstly, the scope statement should list the main constraints and assumptions, and so I would expect to see a couple of paragraphs, not 20 pages. And secondly, we don't need to include time, scope and cost in constraints and assumptions. Many times I've seen my students write the following in the scope statement. Key constraints, we must keep within budget. We must complete the project within the schedule. We cannot miss any of the products. Key assumptions, we have enough budget. We can complete the project in time. We are able to deliver all the products. Key risk, we may run out of budget. We may not deliver on time. We may not be able to deliver all the products. These are constraints and assumptions and risks that apply for every project in the entire known universe. And because they're so common in every project, we don't actually need to write them down unless there's a specific reason for this project that makes it important to list them. Okay, I think we've covered the constraints and assumptions, so now we'll have a look at the requirements documentation, which was created by the previous process, Collect Requirements. These are what we are going to refine into the final scope. And lastly, the risk register. The risk register contains response strategies that may affect the project scope, such as reducing or changing project and product scope to avoid or mitigate a risk. And I got that one from PMBOK Guide, page 152. The enterprise environmental factors will provide information on organisation structure, infrastructure, personnel administration and marketplace conditions. And the organisational process assets provide policies, procedures and templates for a project scope statement, project files from previous projects and lessons learned from previous phases or projects. Now let's look at the tools and techniques. Number 1, expert judgment, which is the input from individuals or groups with specialised knowledge or training in defining scope, preferably on similar projects. Technique number 2 is data analysis, and in particular alternatives analysis to evaluate different ways of meeting the requirements. Number 3 is decision making, and in this case multi-criteria decision making, which is an attempt to simplify the process where various criteria are listed and ranked in a matrix. Tools and techniques number 4, interpersonal and team skills, and the skill in demand here is facilitation. Facilitation is used with focused sessions that bring key stakeholders together to define product requirements. Workshops can be used to quickly define cross-functional requirements and reconcile stakeholder differences because of their interactive group nature. Well-facilitated sessions can build trust, foster relationships and improve communication among the participants, which can lead to increased stakeholder consensus. In addition, issues can be discovered earlier and resolved more quickly than in individual sessions. And that came from PMBOK Guide, page 145. You probably realise by now it is very important to regularly read the PMBOK. Some people rely on study courses and study guides. Then they go into the examination and they fall apart because they haven't actually read the PMBOK. You do need to check it through occasionally, and especially areas such as the glossary. And finally, tools and techniques number 5, product analysis, which is used to describe the use, characteristics and features of the end products. For the exam, you need to know the list of example product analysis techniques: product breakdown, requirements analysis, systems engineering, value analysis and value engineering. That takes us to the outputs. Guess what the main output is? That's right, the scope statement. The scope statement is a description of the project scope, major deliverables, assumptions and constraints. The project scope statement documents the entire scope, including project and product scope. It describes the project's deliverables in detail. And it also provides a common understanding of the project scope among project stakeholders. It may contain explicit scope exclusions that can assist in managing stakeholder expectations. It enables the project team to perform more detailed planning, guides the project team's work during execution, and provides a baseline for evaluating whether requests for changes or additional work are contained within or outside the project's boundaries. And that's from PMBOK Guide, page 154. The scope statement tends to be very detailed, and it is repeatedly defined and updated right throughout the project. So you might be wondering what the project charter is used for as an input in the later processes after the scope statement has been produced. The simple answer is it depends what you're looking for. The scope statement is very detailed, which it needs to be to deliver the products, but for some purposes it is too detailed, and as we say, you can't see the forest for the trees. There are times when you just need a high-level view of products and requirements and assumptions and constraints and risks, and that's when you use a charter. That is a useful tip for the exam because sometimes it asks you to identify the inputs to a process, and so you need to develop the skill of determining what the process needs to achieve its purpose. Please study Table 5.1, Elements of the Project Charter and Project Scope Statement on page 155 of the PMBOK Guide to show you the typical contents of a scope statement. And as the final outputs to the defined scope process, the following documents will be updated: the assumption log to record additions, changes and deletions to the constraints and assumptions; requirements documentation and requirements traceability matrix to record additions, changes and deletions to those requirements; stakeholder register, same purpose. And so that brings us to the end of the defined scope process. The next lesson is 5.4, Create Work Breakdown Structure, which is actually one of my favourite chapters. So please read the corresponding chapter in the PMBOK Guide before watching the video.